please remain standing for the reading of the word. Our scripture reading for today is found in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated.
All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hope Church. My name is Drew. I'm one of the pastors here. Hey, do me a favor. High five your neighbor and say, "Merry Christmas." Can you do that real quick? Yes. Hey, do me another favor. High five your other neighbor and say, "The Knicks won the NBA Cup." Can you do that real quick? Yeah. Yes. That's right. Now, hey, we are so delighted that you've joined us here. This is kind of a tradition of ours as a church family, actually. At the end of the year, while people are away, we can actually gather in one location throughout the city for us to be together. So we're delighted that you've joined us. We do have a Korean meal. It's a meal with Korean food. You're probably like, what's a Korean meal? We'd love for you to join us in the cafeteria after the service, again, for us as a way just to fellowship together and celebrate this season together. Hey, if you've been with us over the last few weeks, you know that we've actually been in this message series called Christmas in the City, and what we've been looking at is in the scriptures, there's actually these unique kind of cities that are highlighted in different ways, and about the way that God invites us to actually live and flourish and hopefully minister and be present in a city. And as we've been looking at these various cities, we've been talking about what is God's invitation to us in living in arguably the greatest city in the world. What does it look like for us then to be a people who are following Jesus in a unique way while living our own lives in whatever industry, vocation, age range, whatever season or perspective that we find ourselves in today? What does it mean for us to follow Jesus in the middle of a city like this? Now, one of the books that we've referenced over the past few weeks is this book by St. Augustine. Now, St. Augustine was actually a bishop of Hippo, which was in northern Africa. He himself, in the 4th century, had a dramatic conversion at the age of 31. He was someone that in his 20s and in his own learned years, he was a brilliant scholar who also, in his 20s, struggled a lot with also philosophy, politics, also living a promiscuous life. He was someone that was wrestling with the meaning of life and what is life all about. He was wrestling with his own kind of perspective and journey as a young person, end up coming to this dramatic conversion where he wrote this very personal, honest kind of treatise called Confessions. And in his book Confessions, he talks about his own doubts, his own struggles, his own lusts, and the ways in which he had been kind of animated. His life had been animated by all these different pursuits in his own life. Now, here's what ends up happening. He has this dramatic conversion, and later, early in the 5th century, he would actually write this book called The City of God, which is one of the most incredible theological treatises. Now, he writes this in the context that the Roman Empire, the empire that was the big empire that had the strong military and might and economy in that area of the world, was this place that no one thought that Rome would fall. But what ends up happening is that Rome all of a sudden feels incredibly vulnerable, because what happens at the beginning of the 5th century is the Visigoths actually invade Rome and actually make conquest into parts of Rome. So now all of a sudden people are like, oh my goodness, Rome itself could fall. Now, what people end up doing is they start blaming Christians about this. And Augustine now, as a seasoned kind of follower of Jesus, he ends up writing this book called The City of God. And what he talks about is how there, in many ways, as we live in the world around us, we live, and there's 2 cities. There's a city of man that, of course, people are building, and it's shaped by the pursuits that often shape the human spirit: ambition, pride, selfishness. And then he talks about, though, there's a different reality that is occurring while people are building the city of man. There's this other reality that he wanted to open the eyes of all these people who are wrestling with, oh my goodness, Rome might fall one day. And what he was basically saying is, don't you see, in reality, you may not have eyes to see it, but there's a truer reality that goes beyond the city of man that you're building. There's a city of God that he's building. And if we could just get out of the doldrums of our normal everyday lives, and we can actually experience that there's a city of God that God is building that will not decay and will not fall, and is not founded on the principles of the world, but it's actually founded by a greater kind of virtue, the virtues of love and kindness and sacrifice. A city of God that Jesus is building. Now, in many ways, this whole series has been about that. Has been about what does it look like for us in our everyday lives. Now, no matter where you are in your spiritual journey, you might be someone who, you're just here for the first time today and you're like, I just came because I heard there's Korean food, Or others of you, maybe you're here just, because a friend or a parent or some sort of family person brought you here. Whatever it might be, what does it look like for us to just get out of the doldrums of our normal living and to be able to see a reality that actually might be more true and significant, to actually explain away what is the true meaning of life. And really, that's what the Christmas story is all about. Now, here's the thing. Even if you're not religious, you probably have heard the passage that was read for us earlier. I mean, many of us have probably heard these stories, heard about the town of Bethlehem, heard about Jesus being born to a virgin, and how in the world did this even happen? And we have our own questions. Well, check out what it says in this historical account, because I want you to notice, and we're going to really highlight just one small point in the passage that was read earlier. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. Now, Bethlehem was this small little kind of nothing town just a little bit south of Jerusalem. It says, during the time of King Herod. Herod was this historical figure named Herod the Great, who was kind of a puppet governor over this area of Judea. Herod was known as being this brilliant person who built all sorts of architectural marvels, but he was also someone that was incredibly insecure, which we'll talk about in a moment. It says, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Now, in some ways, this part of the story is so interesting because, Magi, who in the world are Magi? They're not part of the religious establishment, and they're from this foreign area, just talking about the east. Now, notice how King Herod responds. He says, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Now, this is a historical account. So immediately when someone's listening to this story and they hear that King Herod is disturbed, everyone's like, yep, that fits. That fits exactly how Herod would live his life. Because if you knew anything about him, yes, he was this person who was this puppet governor, but he was also someone that was incredibly insecure. So insecure, in fact, that he had his wife murdered. He had 3 different children murdered whenever he would sense that someone was threatening his throne or his power. And you thought your in-laws were something, could you imagine? So King Herod is incredibly insecure. So you get what's happening? These foreigners basically come, and these foreigners are basically like, hey, we heard there's this king to be born. And we followed the star to follow. And so King Herod immediately is disturbed. Now, notice what this historical account tells us. It says, when he had called together all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law. Now, in other words, these are the religious establishment. Because he's wondering, these magi, somehow, they've come and they follow, they've heard news about this deliverer, this new kind of king. Now, it says, he asked them, where is the Messiah to be born? He asks the religious experts. Now, notice what happens. Immediately, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, almost immediately, they respond, in Bethlehem, of course, in Judea. That's where, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler. This idea, this was a prophetic word that was given in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, centuries earlier, predicting that someone, a deliverer, would come from Bethlehem who will shepherd my people Israel. Now, here's what's interesting, because, I mean, have you ever wondered this, right? Like, there's stories about the Magi, King Herod, there's all these different people, and yet, I found so interesting as I was meditating on this passage. Here, Herod was so kind of insecure, reactive to what other people are saying and thinking, and he, of course, and later what would happen is he'd become so threatened that he would command an edict to kill all the young boys in Bethlehem. Now, that was Herod's response. But did you notice this? Who does he go to when he's asking, wait a minute, like, tell me more about this king and where he's supposed to be born? He asks the religious leaders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law. And did you notice this? When he asked them, hey, where is this king supposed to come from? Where is this ruler coming from? Immediately, they're like, actually, it's in Bethlehem. That's actually common knowledge amongst the religious leaders. In Bethlehem. In fact, they quote Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Everyone knows, yeah, the Messiah is supposed to come from Bethlehem. But wait a minute. The chief priest and the you guys know this? Y'all know this fact? You can recite it, recite the verses about it. You've heard about Bethlehem. You've studied it. You've pored over it. But why aren't you guys going to Bethlehem too? And these chief priests and teachers are like, we're good. We're just telling you the facts here. Now, isn't that interesting? Here, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, immediately, they know the prophetic words. They know the scriptures. And here's what this passage actually reveals to us, especially when we look at these chief priests and teachers of the law. And it's this. It's that you can actually know a whole lot about Bethlehem, but never actually make the journey to Bethlehem. You can have pored over the books and prayed over the texts and know a whole lot about Bethlehem, but not have one inkling to actually make the journey. And now the historical record actually tells us that it was Magi that were actually there to witness the miraculous birth of Jesus. And yet, a lot of people actually knew about Bethlehem, but very few actually made the journey. You know, one of the things that my wife often points out to me is I love watching the show Top Chef. And I don't know if you've ever watched the show Top Chef, but she knew that I was starting to get really into this cooking show because I would basically be like, I think this salmon needs a little bit more acid. And she's like, acid, what are you talking about? You know, and she would like to tell people like, oh my goodness, Drew just loves watching Top Chef, but he never cooks. Just never. Doesn't know. He just makes cereal for the kids. Like that's his lane, you know. Maybe frying an egg, you know, that's my lane. Can know a lot about watching cooking, but never actually cook anything. But you know this. I mean, this is the human condition, isn't it? We can actually know a whole lot about things, but never actually make the journey ourselves. I could read tons of books on cultivating atomic habits. Of course, the book that was popularized by James Clear. And yet, when it comes down to it, it's great to read it, but right, like once we make these New Year's resolutions, and then after a few days or weeks or months, those habits, it was great. I read it. But I don't know if those habits are for me. I can know a whole lot about writing and reading books on money and managing money and on investing. But at the end of the day, right, when those sales come to the fore, and I know I probably shouldn't spend that money, I can know a whole lot about the wise ways to leverage my money. But at the end of the day, I'm really not going to make the journey or make any drastic changes in my own life. I mean, you and I, we know this story. We do this all the time. I can know a whole lot about Bethlehem, but maybe never really make the journey myself. I can know a whole lot about what it means to live a nutritious lifestyle, but gosh, those Christmas cookies during the season, a little tempting, a little difficult. But I've read it all. You know what's interesting is, now here, I'm talking about the human condition here, but did you notice, like, it was actually the chief priests and the teachers of the law who struggled with this. It was the people who had pored over this, who had read it time and time again. It wasn't the people that had just kind of, oh my goodness, it's the first time I'm learning this new fact. It was actually the religious leaders, like myself. People who you would expect, oh, you're the ones that are really committed to this text. You're the ones that are really committed to this spirituality thing. And yet it's these people who somehow know a lot about Bethlehem and yet are unwilling to make the journey themselves. You know what's interesting is I remember meeting with a pastor who, that pastor had hit a wall in their own spiritual lives. Their prayer life and their own kind of spiritual journey was kind of in shambles. They were overworked, extremely tired. Many of their relationships around them, including with his spouse as well as with his children, was fractured. And in the middle of this, I said to him, you know, I work with this organization called Emotional Healthy Discipleship. Can we come alongside you to help? And Emotional Healthy Discipleship was this ministry that was birthed out of people when it comes down to, we're used to doing a whole lot of things, and yet there's this internal part of our lives when we hit a wall, when we realize we really need help. And so I remember I said to him, would you want to kind of go on this journey together with me in Emotional Healthy Discipleship? And here's what he ended up saying to me. He said, oh, yeah, I've read all of it. I practiced none of it. I mean, that's the truth. That's the reality. I mean, isn't that most of us? Oh, yeah, I've read that. I've got it. I've got that in my tool bag, you know. I've got that. But if there was an inventory that was done about our own lives, very few of us practice the very things that we've read about. And the reality is, especially with our information-saturated age, so many of us are some of the most well-learned. You've gone to the best institutions. You are experts in your fields. And yet so many of us, when it comes to life and spirituality, yes, we've read about it. We've heard all about Bethlehem. And yet when it comes down to living a life, of implementing things in our lives, we actually practice none of it. You can know a lot about Bethlehem and never actually make the journey to Bethlehem. And we can almost deceive ourselves because I've read a lot about it. I've heard a lot about it. I've watched YouTube clips on it. And yet we practice none of it. Now, I say this to you as someone who actually, I do a lot of stuff with Emotional Healthy Discipleship. And very recently, I mean, one of the ways in which when my wife and I get into arguments, you know, we'll start arguing. And when I feel like I can't get my point across because she won't listen, she's being so stubborn. I'm sure none of you have this issue, but I'm like, ah! And so I'll drop this line. I'll say like, I lead emotionally healthy discipleship. You know how much counseling and therapy that I've been in? How much counseling and therapy have you been in? You know how hard I've worked on myself? And you just won't listen to me, the president of Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. And Tina's like, oh, is that what you learn in Emotional Healthy Discipleship? That you should leverage that in an argument like a child? And I'm like, I'm the president, you know, like. I mean, but. And then of course later on I come and I apologize and. Gosh, I mean, it's the human condition, isn't it? Like. The moment when I think, I've read it all, I've got it all figured out. No, I can handle this addictive behavior. I got it under control. I got this. Don't worry. Like, hey, listen, with things, what it relates to my money and stuff, I got this. I got it. When it comes to unhealthy patterns in my relationship, no, I've read that book. I've listened to Dr. Phil and whoever else and Oprah. I got it. See, it's very easy for you and I to actually know a whole lot about Bethlehem. But it's so difficult to actually make the journey to Bethlehem. Benjamin Bloom, who was an American educational psychologist, he taught at the University of Chicago, and he's very well known for actually creating what's called Bloom's taxonomy. He studied how is it that people actually really change, and personal change, organizational change. And here's an adapted version of Bloom's taxonomy. And he basically talks about how this is the way that people change. Initially, what they do is they get this awareness of something. For instance, like you read a book on like what healthy eating habits might look like. So all of a sudden now I'm aware of these things. And then I begin to ponder it, right? Something happens where I'm getting a little bit older. Maybe I strained my calf or something and I'm aware of it. And now I'm starting to ponder this like, wow, I should really start focusing on my health a little bit more. And then I realize as I go and get a doctor's checkup and I realize my cholesterol is really, really high, I just need to start implementing some changes. I'm in my mid-40s now. What's going to happen? So now I start to value it. But he talks about how there's this massive action behavioral gap. And you and I know this. I mean, yeah, why is it that so many of us, we could read all of it and do none of it? It's because there's this action behavioral gap. And something needs to change for us to actually take the step and start making some significant changes in our lives. And he talks about how change doesn't happen overnight. It actually happens over a series of awareness, pondering, value. And then this gap needs to somehow be traversed until we finally get to prioritizing it and owning it. And it's the only way that people can change. Recently, I was part of a strategic planning session with a consultant, and he gave me this other paradigm. If you look, I don't have any slick kind of graphics for it. I just basically took a picture of it. And he talked about, he said, listen, he said, first there's a question of like, yeah, we could do this, then we should do this, and then it's we must do this. But he said there's another step after we must do this. And he talked about, he wrote a little dotted line here, and he said at the top of the pyramid is we will. It's this moment when we actually begin to take the steps towards Bethlehem. To actually say, I'm moving beyond valuing it, pondering it, and I'm actually going to take that leap to go towards Bethlehem so that I could experience the transformation that's needed. Now, notice, like, I thought what he would write right at the dotted line where it says we will, I thought he would say, the real key for this is basically like picking yourself up by your bootstraps and basically like pounding through it, grinding harder. But notice the word that's next to that image. It's the surrender that's needed to somehow align my will, my heart, my humility, my hunger, and to actually make the step of we will. Now, here's the thing though. Have you ever wondered why in the world, okay, you've made this case, but I can't believe it. You're telling me not one chief priest or teacher of the law actually made the journey to Bethlehem? What in the world were they thinking? If they only knew. And really, what is the incentive? What would have been the incentive for any of these people to actually go to Bethlehem? Well, first, if you actually realize though what Bethlehem, what it was known for, it might actually make more sense why none of these people actually made the journey. Because here are some words that actually describe what Bethlehem was like. You see, Bethlehem, it's actually really, really small. A few hundred people at most, known more for its sheep than people during that time. Bethlehem was so small. It had nothing grandiose about it. There was no palace or market. It wasn't a popular trade destination. It was basically just this like little dot on the map that was en route to somewhere else. It was small. It was insignificant. It was forgettable, easily forgettable. Now, of course, there have been these prophetic words about Bethlehem and the line of David and how David had come from Bethlehem. But most people were like, well, David left Bethlehem. He didn't stay there, and it still remained this nothing little town. You know, when I was in college, I went to college in Berkeley, California, and we would drive down from Berkeley down to Southern California, where I grew up in Los Angeles. And each time when the fastest way was taking the 5 freeway straight down from Berkeley down to Los Angeles. And now if you take the 5 freeway, it's the most direct route, but you basically are passing all these like small little kind of one stoplight towns throughout California. But there was one city that we would always stop in whenever we made the journey from Berkeley down to Los Angeles. Anyone know what the city this is? You're like, why are we talking about this, Drew? We're from New York. Anyhow, it's called Kettleman City. You know what I'm talking about? Liz, you know what I'm talking about? Yes. Lydia, yeah, Kettleman City. Now, why did everyone stop at the Kettleman City? It's because that's where the In-N-Out burger was. Everyone knew, like, hey, on the journey from the Bay Area down to Los Angeles, we're going to stop at In-N-Out. And so we would always go there and see other classmates that are also making the journey and that sort of thing. And so as I was thinking about, like, what is like this nothing little town? And I was thinking, you know what? Bethlehem's not even Kettleman City. There's no In-N-Out there. It's one of those small towns that I didn't even care to look up and do research over for this sermon that we passed through to get to Kettleman City. I mean, that's what Bethlehem was. It's just this forgettable, nothing little town. It's small, it's insignificant, it's hidden, and it's powerless. Now, no wonder. Like, have you ever wondered, wait a minute, these chief priests and teachers, they knew that the Messiah would come to Bethlehem. And they're like, wait, I could imagine someone being like, so are you guys going to go too? And they're like, no, we're good. We're good. You know, a few years ago, I was meeting with, I meet with different pastors throughout the city, and there's this pastor from Staten Island I was meeting with. And as I was talking to him, I was like, hey, if you're ever in Midtown, let's grab lunch together. It'd be great to get together. And he says to me, he goes, oh yeah, that's great, man. I'll tell you, if I'm in Midtown, I go to Manhattan sometimes. And then he goes, hey, if you're ever in Staten Island, let's have lunch. And a part of me had this like visceral reaction. I was like, yeah, I'll let you know. And I was honestly thinking about this, like as I was thinking about like Bethlehem being like this small little insignificant powerless town. And I was thinking like, I was thinking about this passage, that conversation. And I remember I was thinking to myself, gosh, if I heard somehow that like a dramatic, drastic move of God was happening in Staten Island, like you had to go there to believe it, like signs and wonders and miracles. Like there's a part of me that would be like, and he would be like, and honestly, people were flocking to Staten Island. There was a part of me that initially, as I was thinking about this, I'm like, I'd probably say, is there a way I can zoom in? Like, can I join on Zoom? It's really hard to get to Staten Island. Like, whether you're driving or you take the ferry, it's just a long time, you know? Like, pray for that move of God. I mean, I could totally understand why these chief priests and teachers of the law, they know a whole lot about Bethlehem. But they themselves would not make this journey. Human history would be unfolding. Earth, history-changing events would be happening. And they would miss out. And so the question for me and you today, especially with all the pageantry of New York and all the things that we have going on in our own personal lives and in the city around us, is will you journey to Bethlehem to meet Jesus? Will you actually go beyond simply thinking about it and pondering it, to actually beginning to value it, value what it means to follow Jesus, and to make the step beyond what's small and hidden and insignificant and powerless? Now, some of you, just like me, it's like, wait a minute, you're making an invitation for me to go to Staten Island? Is that what you're saying? Like to do things like, and I'm like, yeah. And you're probably wondering, well, what is the incentive? Now, here's what's so stunning, because look at the early church. Look at what the Apostle Paul, it's really extraordinary, because the Apostle Paul had been someone who, as a Jewish person and a Roman citizen, had actually gained a whole lot of clout in his own life and journey. But notice what the Apostle Paul writes about his own journey from actually the life of status, significance, learnedness that he had come from, to now this journey of actually following Jesus. Look at what he writes. He says, But whatever was gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage, trash, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith. What? Paul's able to say, listen, everything is worth nothing. It's garbage compared to Bethlehem, compared to actually meeting Jesus and knowing Jesus. Now, why is he able to say this? He says, I want to know Christ, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. Not that I've already obtained all this or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to hold that which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But look at what he says. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. He's able to make this incredible claim about his own personal journey. He's like, listen, I've tasted success. I've reached the mountaintop when it comes to my profession, my career. But listen, I consider everything garbage compared to knowing Jesus. In fact, earlier in his letter to the church in Philippi, this is what he says. He says, for to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. Now, what? Paul? He's able to make these claims, outlandish claims about, listen, he's like, basically, yeah, I've made the journey to Bethlehem. And the reason why is because I consider what Christ has given to me more than riches or fame or power or all the thing that the city has to offer me. He says, more than all those things, I consider them nothing compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Jesus, of actually being found in Jesus. In other words, he's talking about he's found something in Bethlehem, in Jesus, that far outweighs the difficult journey as it might be to get to Bethlehem. Clayton Christensen, who was a professor at Harvard Business School, he was really well known for kind of his stuff on disruptive innovation. And he's well known because he actually wrote this book that became a New York Times bestseller that was really the title of a book that mimicked his last lecture in one of his classes that eventually became one of the most popular courses at Harvard Business School. Clayton Christensen, and the book is called How Will You Measure Your Life? And the reason why it became so popular, and I remember when I was reading the book, one of the most riveting kind of accounts that he gives, when he actually wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review, and then again it became part of this book. But one of the things that he talked about was in his own journey, he realized as he himself at these various different kind of reunions, he was a Rhodes Scholar himself. He said he found himself, he would go to these reunions where all these people who were kind of reaching the elite status within their in the academy as well as in work. They were people who were being promoted. They were entrepreneurial. They were, and he said that at every kind of reunion they would go, and on the outside, everyone looked like they were doing incredibly well professionally. They were crushing it at work. They were becoming founders of companies. They were becoming board chairs of other companies. And every single time he'd go to these reunions, there was this gleaming sense of pride. And they were, people were newly married at these reunions. But at every subsequent reunion, he would go and he would notice that these same people who were crushing it in their fields, they'd go to the next reunion and people would actually, their families, they'd be going through a divorce, a painful divorce. Many of them would be estranged from their children. And he said at different reunions, actually, as it went on, like some of their friends actually got arrested for white-collar crime. And people's lives had begun to deteriorate at these various reunions. And that's what actually prompted him to actually talk about this idea, like, hey, you could be crushing it in your career, in business, but the things that ultimately really matter could become the things that you leave on the back burner. Hence this question, how will you measure your life? And he asked this question to hopefully reframe all of these ambitious, young people who had the world in front of them, to ask the question, what really does matter in life? And really what Paul is basically saying, listen, I found the pearl of great price. I found what really matters, far more than accolades, success, money, status. Not to say that those are bad things, but these things aren't ultimate things. Now, I've wondered, though, what would lead Paul to say this? What would lead him? Here's a very personal moment for Paul himself. When he himself was actually, remember that behavioral gap that we're talking about? Well, the early Christians were all sinners who struggled themselves. Notice what actually Paul writes to the church in Rome. Look at how honest this is about his own journey of trying to get to Bethlehem, of trying to meet Jesus. Look at what he says. He says, I don't understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I have to do, but what I hate I do. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Anyone struggle with this as well? Just me, I guess. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this chasm? From this body that is subject to death. I keep doing the things I don't want to do. I keep messing up in my relationships, my pursuit, my ambition. What can rescue me? I got to work harder. That's what I got to do. Got to get more degrees. Got to get that promotion. Look at what Paul says. Thanks be to God, who delivers me through Jesus Christ, our Lord. There's now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, he says. He says, I still struggle, but thanks be to God. I have the pearl of great price. I've got that ultimate thing that far outweighs the small, insignificant, hidden, powerless ways that might seem to not be important. I found it. I found the treasure. The one who loves me, the one who forgives me, the one who bears with me even in my struggle, the one who even when I don't do the right thing all the time, there's the one who loves me, welcomes me, and gives me a way home. You know, when I first started dating Tina, one of the things she said to me was, she said, you know, a place in the city that I've always wanted to go is the Staten Island Botanical Garden. I was like, I'll take you. Let's go. I got you. Found out it was a 2-hour commute. It's okay. I found the pearl. I'll go to Staten Island. Let's all stand and the worship team come forward.